Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk Podcast. This is the series in which I speak to people who can help us better understand human risk and look at ways of helping to mitigate it. Now, I thought given human risk has the word risk in it, it was about time I spoke to a risk professional. And in this episode, I speak to Alex Sidorenko, who has worked in a number of different industries and a number of different countries in the field of risk management. But he's not your traditional kind of risk manager. Alexei has some very interesting ideas about how risk can be better managed and how it can be presented to people in a manner that makes it relevant and easy to understand. Now, one word of warning on this podcast, it was recorded last year, and due to, well, let's just say some human risk on my part, I haven't managed to release it until now. And during a discussion, we talk about something called Risk Awareness Week, which Alexei set up last year. I'm delighted to say that that event has now passed. It was incredibly successful. And in fact, it was so successful, it's coming back in 2020. So everything that you hear about the 2019 Risk Awareness Week applies equally to the 2020 event that is coming in October later this year. Sit back and enjoy what is a highly relevant, highly fascinating conversation with one of the most innovative risk thinkers I've come across. So do enjoy my conversation with Alex Sidorenko. So Alexei, thank you so much for joining the Human Risk Podcast. So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you about, how did you get excited and interested by the topic of risk?
Thanks, Christian. It's a good question. I ended up in risk by a complete coincidence. My dad was doing PhD in chemical engineering at one of the largest universities in Australia at the time, and just like any year 12 student, I had no idea what I wanted to do after school. And he said, "Why don't you try risk management? It sounds fun." And I said, "Yeah, Dad, whatever." And it was my fourth choice on the list of priorities for the university degrees that I wanted to do.
What were the first three? That's intriguing.
I think they were like the most basic accounting and finance, like like what people typically choose, I guess, that have like a good sense for mathematics. So anyway, I ended up doing this, fourth career choice, and it was so hilarious that we were the first ever graduate intake at the university doing this undergraduate Bachelor of Business Risk Management. We were the first guinea pigs, and we can tell that we were the first because the faculty actually forgot they started the course. So for the first month, we would rock up to the class. There was no one there. We would wait 15 minutes as per the policy, and then we would just go home, and we were the happiest kids, on the planet. We had no risk management classes for like a month. But because some of the students were exchange students, and unlike the locals, they were actually paying for the education, they complained. So a month later, they actually had a lecturer sent to us, and we started, doing the whole risk management degree. And by complete coincidence, I did a second degree in parallel in statistics and econometrics. Thank God. Who knew risk management was quantitative
right.
back then? And I somehow kind of ended up in risk. And because the timing was pretty interesting, because I, just like in school, after university, I had no idea where I wanted to work. So I literally opened a book of risk management companies. I opened Yellow Pages, and I opened like a career book, which under the heading risk management had all the big four consulting companies and like the usual suspects, all the banks. And I literally, I had no idea who Deloitte was or PwC. I randomly started sending applications for the graduate intakes. And I got into Deloitte, and I got into the department which was called Enterprise Risk Services. I think that's what it was called. So I came with an assumption that I would be joined with similar-minded people. Well, imagine my surprise when there were 120 people in the department, and I was the only risk manager. All the others were either internal auditors, IT auditors, security professionals, or business continuity specialists. So there was literally no one doing risk at the time. And can you imagine a graduate, like a very young kid, doing risk in a big four company where he's the only risk person in the state. I mean, New South Wales is like a huge state. It's almost like the financial center of Australia. And I was, for a very, very long time, until I started building the team, I was the go-to person for risk. And it was weird because I had no one to learn from, really, and kind of exciting at the same time. And I think ever since then, I just tried to make the best of the opportunity. Since I end up in risk, I might as well just use it to my advantage. And I guess I was lucky enough to meet a lot of interesting people and read a lot. Because I mean, I think 15 years ago, I read the first book by Nassim Taleb, Fooled by Randomness.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that just changed my world completely. I mean, it was a different perspective on life, where we think everything is, predictable and nice unless we get spikes, but in fact the world is random, and then sometimes we get plateaus of predictable behavior. Then of course I stumbled onto all the psychologists that I read Thinking Fast and Slow, I think when I was still in the early 20s, which again, that just explodes your brain, because you're going like, you're thinking you understand how the world works, and then apparently scientists have proven it to be otherwise. So it's it was an interesting transition, and I've been doing this for so long now. I think I somehow enjoy it a lot. I don't know really why, but it gives me this satisfaction.
And I think that your passion for risk, which sounds like a strange thing to say, comes out really, really clearly when you talk about the topic, and you have an energy and an enthusiasm for a topic that I think for many people is this kind of difficult to understand concept. And I guess it's sort of, it must be interesting for you in the same way. I walk around and I see human risk everywhere. You've got an even bigger topic, right? Which is the whole risk universe. Do you find yourself seeing it everywhere and worrying about more things, or are you able to share?
That's very funny. I mean, my wife hates me for doing that all the time. But before I tell you that story, something you said really triggered in my mind. Sometime in I think midway through my career, I made a conscious decision to move away from risk and never work in risk again. So I resigned from PwC. And I joined the strategic consulting company, and I moved basically into strategy consulting. And I was there for the whole month. Then I was headhunted back as the head of risk of one of the biggest venture funds in Russia, because they offered like double or triple the salary. I can't remember. So it was an easy decision. But at that time, I had an internal conflict, thinking, well, I know a lot about risk. I mean, after all, I wrote a big portion of the global PwC methodology on risk management. And I thought I understood, a lot about risk. But when I started working, not as a consultant, but as an actual, in-house head of risk, I was amazed at why people don't do any of the things they're supposed to do, why they make decisions completely differently to what best practices tell us they should be doing, why they choose to ignore all of the risk advice. I really had that internal disconnect between, I want to do something good, but whatever I do doesn't have any impact on the actual business or the people. And if anything, they see me as a pest, as opposed to a useful support for the decision making. And I think that's when I was lucky enough, again, by probably some sort of coincidence or a series of coincidences, discovering decision science and discovering the whole concept of decision quality, decision making, and just kind of coming back to my original background in statistics, to the quantitative risk analysis, and realizing that if we actually don't do the risk management the way it's kind of positioned and presented as best practices by risk institutes and associations and consulting companies. If we don't do that, but instead we actually do risk management as the scientists tell us how to do it, and use some of the science that sits behind the foundation in mathematics, in psychology, in economics, in decision science. If we use that foundation, then the quality of information, the insights that we provide based on our skills and our risk analysis are amazing, are mind-blowing. They truly change the way decisions are made. They change the nature of decisions. For example, executives thought they have choice between A and B, but they ended up doing F because A, B, C, D, E were considered and then parked aside because they didn't work. And in fact, F, which was never on the table to begin with, but your risk analysis brought it up. They start making those decisions. So I had this kind of re-evolution inside me where I discovered that, the risk management, as I call it, risk management 1, doesn't really work and it's a waste of time, but there is more to it. And instead of kind of trying to turn this waste of time, window dressing stuff and pretend that it can work, there's actually proper science that we can use to help the actual decision makers, apply risk management. And that's what I think. That's I think one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about, because I've discovered, at least for myself, that using risk analysis can change the way people make decisions. It changes the outcomes. It changes the process. It's a complete game changer. And that's why you asked me about how do I, whether I use it in life and how does it affect my personal life. I mean, I had almost a Monte Carlo simulation budget for my wedding. I had reserves on my wedding budget, which my wife wanted to spend every single day, but it was untouchable, and it ended up saving us a lot of headache later. And now, I mean, we're picking a place for our daughter's sixth birthday, and there are multiple options. And I've made my wife to write a mind map with different options, and then do like a simple scoring methodology on pros and cons. What are the 5 criteria that will need to be considered for us to make a good decision? And then we go plus minus for each criteria, and we ended up choosing the option which was the least obvious when we began. So again, when you apply risk management to decision making, it's mind blowing, because we were thinking, should we do A or B? We again ended up doing like Z, because we've considered all the other options. First, it's never A or B. It's always multiple options. And the research that I love quoting is what I can't remember who the scientists were, but they did a study of like 130 executive decisions, and they found that 70% of the time decisions are binary, as in do this or do nothing. But that's not how the world works. There are always hundreds of choices how to achieve the same objective, and we are restricting ourselves without using the proper risk management tools. And risk management tools help us see kind of the broader picture and hence make a better choice.
I think that's really interesting. I was amused by your shift from talking about decision makers to then referencing your wife, who presumably is a major decision maker in your world.
What's the most hilarious thing I've done and the scariest thing I've done? And maybe to your listeners, don't do the same mistake. I took my wife to one of the courses where I was talking about cognitive biases. I took her to one of the presentations that I did. So now she knows them. She catches me all the time. Every single day she would catch me or do like saying something, and she would go, cognitive bias.
Yeah, it's. I always think if you give people weapons to be able to argue against you, don't be surprised when they use those weapons.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, but I love what you've just articulated around risk management as a positive, because I think there's this perception, particularly in financial services, which is the industry that I've come from, where it's a necessary evil, right? That we have to have these people. Probably because we're told to by regulators and they can deal with some of these complicated things. But what you've just articulated is a thing that says that rather than just being an overhead that you have to have, a kind of insurance policy, if you like, it's actually a strategic advantage. And I think that's a really interesting way of framing it. And I'm not sure many people who are in the discipline put it in those terms.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had an amazing example where a sovereign fund, which is basically like a government-based, largest in the country financial institution that invests all of the oil money or the pension money for the country citizens. They just made, like, they had an epiphany. The risk analysis, they performed the risk analysis properly, and that risk analysis showed that the way the strategy was currently approved was actually limiting the amount of risk the organization was taking. So they actually showed that their current strategy was allowing them to take half of the risk that the regulators and the board of directors approved. And then, can you imagine that the risk had this wonderful conversation saying, guys, you can and you should take more risk. Because the level of returns that you want to provide for the future, success of the country and its citizens, you have to take more risk. And the organization ended up completely rewriting its whole strategy, whole investment strategy for the coming years, to become much more risk-seeking, within limits, obviously, still, because it's a sovereign fund. They're relatively low-risk type organizations, but they were just taking not enough, and hence, they were not generating the returns appropriate for their strategy. It was amazing. It was amazing how doing risk analysis properly can actually highlight even the most surprising, and it was so surprising that the head of risk, realizing what she had to say, had internal conflict to say that, because you don't expect your chief risk officer to come and say, please take more risk.
Right.
And when all the risky deals started coming in, she still internally was kind of squeamish and going like, oh, this is a risky deal. And I kept repeating, yes, but that's a good thing. You need to have those risky deals in your portfolio.
I think it's sort of it's a bit like a priest. You don't expect a priest to tell you to go and sin more.
Yeah,
that's the sort of perception of this thing. But I think you're right. It's a risk management discussions often feel one way, which is though these people are going to constrain me, and same thing with compliance, right? It's these forces of constriction. And actually, I think what you've just articulated nicely is it can be the opposite, right? It can actually be we've looked into this thing and you should be doing more of it, and game on, and it becomes a strategic advantage. I think that's a really, really nice way of looking at it. I guess the other thing I really wanted to pick up with you was around, you spent a lot of time in risk, and I'm focused on human risk. What are your observations on people and risk and thinking about those sorts of dynamics?
In general, I think I find all of the research on risk psychology very scary. And while Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman's is a must-read, obviously, for anyone involved in any kind of decision-making or risk analysis, for that matter, my favorite book is actually Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational, because he really brings it home with very simple examples. Why life is biased. Love is biased, why we purchase phones and cars that we don't need. He makes all those very lifelike day-to-day kind of examples. So I love it. My favorite book, Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely.
He's got a gift to make the complex really simple.
Absolutely. I mean, what a great guy. And the conclusion of all of that is that it's pretty scary. People in general, and I think this is why, while it's nice for the risk managers to say take more risk, the reality is 95% of the time we will be saying you're taking too much risk, because humans are self-serving. I mean, the next bonus payment is much more important for any decision maker than any of the corporate goals or objectives or long-term sustainability and all of that. The confirmation bias and anchoring is huge and very scary. I mean, people genuinely become blind to things that don't go as, that are not aligned with their internal purposes or hidden agendas. Corruption is huge, and it's scary. The only difference between West and East is the Western business decision makers managed to sugarcoat it better and created all those clever business terms for hiding and polishing corruption. But it's just it's horrible. Humans, I think kind of my conclusion on human risk is humans are genuinely not very nice, and they are not very good at making complex, uncertain decisions. And that's why I sometimes, wishfully thinking that we can help with risk analysis. But the reality is, well, at least this is kind of my state of mind at the moment. The reality is we always swim against the current. I mean, it's you come into a person and you say, we can help you improve the quality of your decision making. In the medium and to long term, that will save money, that will make you much more successful. But people just don't care. They're interested about something entirely different. I don't think I nailed yet the perfect selling point for risk management for the top executives. Because every time I talk to top executives about risk management, they nod and they go like, oh, that's interesting. But I see that they have no intention of changing the way they currently make decisions, how they, have all the, it's just, I don't know. Plus I've worked in the countries where it's much more political than economic. And I struggle with the whole decision-making process being much more political than it is commercial or business or society-driven, and it's pretty scary.
I think that's they're coming for you.
Let me pause for a second.
So yeah, I think that's a really interesting set of observations, because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, it's actually kind of logical that people behave in that way, because if you take a school of thought that says the reason we do things is for survival, propagation of the species, and way back when it was all around making sure you were fed and you could mate and survive, that's very short-termist thinking, right? Because you need to survive that day to be able to get to the next one. And I think there's something interesting in what you were saying around the way people think about risk and some of these topics. It's literally, I need to think about the here and now. So it's not surprising to my mind that we asking people to think about pensions, asking people to think about beyond the next bonus, beyond the next kick of whatever hit of whatever kind you get. It perhaps shouldn't surprise us, but I as you were talking, that sort of occurred to me.
Yeah, well, that's why I love that book by Dan Ariely, because it's called Predictably Rational. It's irrational. The human behavior is irrational because in the long term we would be all much more successful and we will all benefit if people acting differently. But it's not unusual. It's not unpredictable. And this is why again I always try to kind of connect back to the scientific research, because I mean a lot of best practices in the risk management sphere, they sound nice, but they go against the very nature of humans. And they go against the very basic, research in human sciences, and you just go like, well, guys, it's not going to work. You can't. There's no point writing a risk management policy and publishing it on the website. It will have zero impact. Or writing a risk management framework document and getting everyone to sign it. I mean, who cares? It will not change the behavior. If we want to integrate risk into decision making, well, first we have to realize that it is extremely difficult, because basically no one wants us there, because people want to make decisions the way they've always been making decisions, and that's irrational sometimes. And they don't want anyone to interfere in irrationality, because rational decision making is hard work, and they don't want extra hard work. And second, there are better ways to integrating into decision making than doing pretty much everything. If you open like a best practice guide on risk management, literally every single point that is listed there is guaranteed to fail, because it ignores the very basic research in human nature.
Right. Yeah, I'm always struck by it. It reminds me of, if you go to a city and if you take the subway map, right? It's very useful for navigating the subway. It's utterly useless if you want to use that to navigate the streets, because it's not designed for that purpose. And I think a lot of risk management stuff is sort of, yes, we have to have a framework and we have to have all these things in place because regulator requires it, or auditor requires it, or someone somewhere requires it. But then you look at it and go, that's not the real world that we're living in. And so the people that you're trying to control don't live by the rules that you've kind of set out. And I think there is this, you've just nicely articulated this disconnect between practice and theory. And there are so many examples of things that, theoretically we all ought to do loads of things. Practically, we don't. Right? We all know that every single one of us makes dumb decisions on a daily basis around what we eat and exercise and financial decisions and whatever else. And so I think this is no different, right? And it seems ironic to me, really, that risk, which sort of is around assuming and knowing what's the worst case scenario, what's the worst that can happen, that we've somehow allowed ourselves to sort of create things that probably, if we thought about it and were honest, don't meet the realities of the world that we're in. It's approximation. It's like any model, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been very clever in coming up with a polite name for all this rubbish that we have to do. I call it Risk Management 1. And Risk Management 1 is basically like a polite name for BS that we have to do, because it's either the regulator, the shareholders, the internal or external auditors, or the audit committee wants to see. The only challenge is that majority of the risk professionals don't realize that's RM1. And so it's basically window dressing. It's nothing more than window dressing. And then RM2 is what we actually use for decision making. And in that, we usually don't have any risk registers. There are no frameworks. There's very little in the way of traditional risk management, because people want tools and analysis to make decisions better. And it doesn't have to have all this beautiful wrapping that we usually call risk management. The challenge is we've always had those tools for better decision making. But I have a separate video on that, but it was back in the 1980s, someone hijacked risk management as a decision-making tool and turned it into astrology. So it literally is astrology. Risk reports that companies generate on a quarterly basis or annual risk reports that they send to the audit committee or the board or the regulators, I mean, that is no different from a horoscope. It has exactly the same scientific foundation. It has exactly the same rigor. It's just as useful for decision-making as a horoscope. And if some of your listeners don't understand the analogy, I basically mean horoscopes as complete rubbish.
I've actually watched that video. I very much enjoyed that one, and we'll stick a link to that in the show notes. Before I finish up and ask people how they can get hold of you, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Risk Awareness Week, which is your new initiative, which has gathered a whole bunch of people together, myself included. So, for which thank you for deeming to include me in this thing. Can you just tell people what that is and what the idea behind it is?
So yes, thank you for participating. I mean, I'm really looking forward to your workshop on human risk, because it's a very important topic. And conferences in general, I mean, I've been speaking at risk management conferences for God knows how many years. I've always struggled with, especially the larger the conference, the more weird the selection of the presentations is. And because Risk Management 1 is so prominent, usually 90% of the presentations in any conference you would have would be about, this window dressing stuff. And people with serious faces would explain to you how you should create, a better looking risk report, which has absolutely meaningless information and has no connection to any kind of decision making, but it has pretty colors. So I've struggled for years with conferences like that. And I thought, well, surely we can do something better. Plus, I hate traveling. Even though I have to for work all the time, I live in Spain, but I have to work globally. I still hate traveling. So I wanted to do something online, and I wanted to do something where I have carefully selected. And as of today, there are, I think, more than 35 speakers, every single one of whom is RM2 in my terminology. That means they're all about decision science. They're all about proper scientific research. They're all about changing the way decisions are made. They're all about using proper quantitative risk analysis tools. They're all about changing the way decisions are made and providing insights to the actual decision makers. So we have more than, for the whole week, and it had to be a week because we had so much content. So 5 days from Monday to Friday, literally non-stop from morning till very late in the evening. There's more than 50 sessions, each session explaining what is decision quality and how that applies. I love some of the sessions. Why using averages in business plans and using single point estimates to calculate KPIs or targets or budgets or schedules is guaranteed to lead to rational decisions, and why we have better mathematical tools to do it. So I feel it will be just amazing in terms of content, collecting it all together, and it will be very heavy. So luckily people have all the replays. They don't have to watch all the sessions live. But in terms of content, I mean, this is just mind-blowing stuff. I'm really excited and thankful for everyone who agreed to participate in this event. Hopefully, this will kind of start the new era of conferences, on risk conferences.
Fabulous. And if people want to find out more, they can go to the website, which is, we'll put up in the notes, but you can tell us now.
It's 2019, which is this year, .riskawarenessweek.com.
Nice and simple. And yeah, I think it's a great initiative, and you know, part of me is amazed by the people you've managed to get together, and part of me isn't, because I think it comes down to your passion and enthusiasm for a topic which comes across speaking to you. And as ever, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. So as well as the Risk Awareness Week, how do people get hold of you if they want more of your fabulous content?
Thanks, Christian. I try to publish everything either in video format, and there's a Risk Academy YouTube channel, which you can find by Googling Risk Academy, or I write articles, which is on the Risk Academy blog, which is actually riskacademy.blog. But again, Risk Academy kind of became, a known brand. If you Google it, you'll find it. But my best achievement is the book that I wrote with a friend of mine, Elena Demidenko, a few years ago. Became the most popular free risk management book on the planet, which I love the most. So if you Google free risk management book, it will send you to the ResearchGate website, which has our book for download. And I think more than 80,000 people downloaded it. So I highly recommend it. It's a nice introduction into the whole world of risk management too, into the decision making.
There we go. 80,000 people cannot be wrong. There we go. On that note, thank you so much for appearing. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Christian.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My massive thanks to Alexi for appearing and to you for listening. Now, just a reminder, this was recorded last year, and due to, well, let's call it human risk, it's taken a little bit longer to get the episode out than originally planned. So Risk Awareness Week 2019 happened. It was incredibly successful. And the good news is that Risk Awareness Week 2020 is on the way in October. So if you want to find out more about that, go to 2020.riskawarenessweek.com. And you can find out more details about what was in last year's by going to the same website URL, but with 2019 at the start. Thanks again for listening. If you aren't already subscribed to the show, you'll find the Human Risk Podcast wherever you get your high quality audio content. As ever, if you have a few moments to leave a review and rating on whichever platform you're using, that would help me to maintain the profile of the show and continue to get the kind of high quality guests that we've managed to get thus far. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you very soon on another episode of the Human Risk Podcast.